We're live. It's a Monday. Happy Monday, everybody. I know this is out of the norm. We usually go live on Thursdays, but I'm trying to be as flexible with everyone's schedule as possible because sometimes I'm trifling and I need to reschedule. So, today's been rough, y'all. I barely made it. Hey, Manny. Trader. Y'all, today has been rough, y'all. So we are going live today with Josh Wilcox. He's the owner of Brooklyn Podcasting Studio. And in honor of the studio, I wore my hoodie for my podcast that I filmed at that studio. He has so much wisdom. He knows a lot about the podcast industry. And he's one of the main reasons why my podcast was successful. Because if you remember those first few episodes, it was rough. Especially when I didn't have a co-host and it was just me talking. It was very rough. And then when I was like interviewing co-hosts and I had like one person come on that was a friend and kind of found out this person is actually not good as a co-host. And then I brought on a person who came on as a guest, my favorite Jenny. She came on as a guest for my show and I ended up wanting her to be a full co-host with me. But yeah, we're going to talk about all things podcasting, marketing for podcasting, the first steps you should take if you're deciding that you want to have a podcast, like all those things. So my filter jumping around, I'm trying to look decent. I didn't do my makeup today. Like I said, today was rough. So we're just going to wait until he joins. Let me actually send it. Because I think he was live and I tried to join his live. I probably misinterpreted because we just got off the phone. And I was like, oh, let me join his live. That was slow of me. Oh, here we go. Accept, it doesn't automatically accept. Like, it takes a minute. It takes a beat. I don't like that. Oh, here we go.
How we doing?
Hi. I'm over here rambling because I'm like, why would I press accept? It doesn't automatically go. I have to like press it a bunch of times. Like,
Oh, I was definitely feeling old man right now because I was trying to. This, like I said, this is my first time doing this, and I was like, I hope I'm not messing this up.
no.
Also, I see you in the OG Sorry Not Sorry hoodie.
That's what I was just saying. In honor of this episode, I had to put on my hoodie.
Yeah, I see you.
Fun fact: I still get paid from that podcast. Not a lot, but I still get money. People still listen to it.
Hey, any money is good money. Any money is good money.
No, because I remember I had ads on it from Anchor, and I'm like, Anchor's still paying me for this? I get like a monthly report, like, oh, you have $30. I'm like, oh, okay, send that. Mm-hmm. But thank you so much for hopping on. We're going to have so much fun with this topic because, like I told you before, for some reason, people keep asking me about podcasting, and I know somewhat because I know based on what you have taught me. And I give you so much of your flowers because I think you played a very instrumental part of my podcast and the little bit of success it did have, especially when I first started filming by myself.
which was, I mean, I always tell people, like, if you're doing it solo, like, it's a really tough thing to do, but like you really executed it well, and I thought you did really good as a solo podcaster.
God, fun fact is that time I came hungover and I had to throw up in the middle of a court.
Oh, I forgot about that.
I forgot about that. Okay. But then when you hear the episode, it sounds like I was getting emotional because the topic was about police brutality.
Yeah.
But really, it was just my mouth was getting watery. I'm like, I gotta throw up.
Yeah.
We have to throw up.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Wow. I completely forgot about that.
But
that's a throwback.
That's one of the main reasons why I steered away from doing live stuff. Because I'm like, I know me, I need to make sure I'm okay. Like, literally today, I was actually hungover dying, but I'm alive now. So.
I was going to say, I hope you're good now.
I am. I got it all out the way. That's why I didn't make it into the office today. I was literally working from bed and then the bathroom and then the bed. But anyway, So for those who don't know, Josh is the owner and lead engineer at Brooklyn Podcasting Studio. Josh, if you want to share a little bit more about your expertise and your background.
So I've been running Brooklyn Podcasting Studio for the last 4 years or so. We opened in like the summer of 2018. Prior to that,
really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it's been, yeah, we're gonna be coming up on our 5 year anniversary this year, which is wild because like that was. It feels like I started the studio just like a hot minute ago. I'm trying to remember. Were you at the studio when I still had hair?
I don't remember. I don't think so. You always wore a hat though, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
I recorded I think 2019 is when I came. I think I recorded my first episode, I know, in July of
Okay.
2019.
Okay, yeah, because I cut my hair. I cut my hair in 2019, but I don't remember exactly when you became a client. But I remember you were like one of my earlier clients, though. But long story short, like, so I opened up Brooklyn Podcasting Studio with a business partner in 2018. But prior to that, I've been working in the music industry for a good little while, like probably like a solid 12, maybe like 12 to 13 years or so.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, I was an audio engineer. I went to school. I went to Full Sail, got an audio degree.
Oh, me
Um,
too.
yeah, I know. I remember that about you too. Yeah,
I
yeah.
was
So
in
I went
school.
to Full.
I got the entertainment business
Yeah, I
master.
got that too. We got the same one. We got the same degree. I don't know if it's been worth anything for me now, but worth a little.
It has. I had one class, but I had to make an EPK. I don't know why I can never say
Yeah,
EPK.
yeah.
And
Like a media.
I made it for my best friend who's a rapper, and he actually uses it, and I just used it for a class, and I was just like, oh, maybe you should use this. I don't know, edit it, but he uses it now.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, I think
yeah.
I just went there just to have I don't know, it just looks good on the resume. Like, oh, you got your master's in entertainment business.
Yeah.
Most of the stuff I learned, I probably would have learned on my own. But anyway.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about that particular degree. I mean, it's been useful a little bit, but long story short, I was working in the music industry for a good little while, mostly as an audio engineer. I think a lot of people have known me for a while. Like my biggest claim to fame was quote unquote working at Jim Jones's studio for about like a year or so. A lot of wild and crazy stories there. But to be honest with you, I'd probably say I had my best times like just recording independent artists. I had a little studio in my crib, recording all types of rappers to all types of R&B singers to a rabbi that does jazz, Frank Sinatra style music, which surprisingly, that was a super fun project for
That
me to
sounds
do. I'm not
fire
even gonna lie.
though.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. It was really dope. Like he could sing his ass off, and he didn't sound like Sinatra, but he had his own thing, and it was a lot of fun making that project. But yeah, I got a chance to work with a whole bunch of artists and stuff like that. But long story short, typical New York story where it's like wasn't making enough bread to quit the 9 to 5, wasn't what's it called? Wasn't making enough money to quit the 9 to 5, and I was always working like, it's kind of funny. I work crazy hours now, and I know I work crazy hours now, but I feel like I'm working crazy hours for going on close to 20 years now, because I was working a 9 to 5 and then either going to the studio or working on some project for another at least 6 to 7 hours a day.
Yeah, the hustle.
So yeah, so it was a hustle and a grind, and I was hustling not for pennies, but for no dollars, no money. Like,
So what made
and
you jump into the podcasting industry, or did that just like happen organically?
so the funny thing is like I had known about podcasting before it was cool, like before it was in fashion. Like I was like a listener to podcasts, like going back to like 2010 or something like that, maybe. So like I knew about podcasts because podcasts has almost been around almost as long as I think iTunes. Like there was always like a thing in the corner of iTunes that said podcasts. And truth be told, like podcasts in the beginning was where I was like getting a lot of my like I was very much into. Oh, I'm still very much into music, but like I was into like a lot of like underground independent artists and like especially a lot of DJs at that time, and they were putting out like these mixes that they couldn't play out in clubs because like they could only play whatever the people wanted to hear. So the stuff that they wanted to play, or maybe some obscure stuff that they wanted to maybe spin, they would put out like an hour-long mix as a podcast. And in the beginning, that's kind of what I knew podcasts.
Is that like SoundCloud?
Yeah, sort of like honestly, like in the early days of podcasting, like at least from what I was consuming, it was kind of like SoundCloud. If I'm being honest about it,
like, what is the significant the difference between podcasting and I guess radio shows? It's the same, right?
No, I mean it's just about how it's being consumed. Like it's just about, but there's really not much of a difference to it other than the fact that radio is live for the most part. So, I mean, you could have some pre-recorded stuff, but how I got into podcasting though was after. So I'd been following podcasts for a while, and then all of a sudden, like I noticed there was a lot of comedians and a lot of other types of shows and other types of content being put out as podcasts, and I would consume them. And long story short, when I kind of realized that like I kind of needed to make a new move to sort of figure out, what I wanted to do. Because for me, it wasn't just the fact that I wasn't making money, because money has never really been like the main driver for like why I do what I do.
Mm-hmm.
But I was on the train one day and I was just like, man, like I don't want to record people anymore. And I was also producing beats and stuff like that for stuff too. Like I was like getting stuff licensed for like commercials and sync and whatnot. And I got a few licenses for a few stuff. I got my stuff from like, funny enough, I don't know if I mentioned this to you because I had a song play on Bad Girls Club that I made. yeah, which I
never thought about that. You was in the studio with us.
I know.
You did not tell me this.
I was getting ready to say, I was like, I'm not sure if I mentioned that to you, but like I knew you had, yeah. Don't get me wrong, like, and the thing is, it wasn't like a song that played for like, minutes or something like that. It was like some segue music that played for like 10, 15 seconds, and I got like a $15 check for it. But
$15?
Yeah, I got a $15 check for it. It wasn't anything massive. So, because they don't pay out that.
Second?
Yeah, they don't pay out that much for that.
Sheesh.
But I was on the train and I was listening to a podcast, and I just all of a sudden, like, it just dawned on me. I was just like, yo, and the thing is, like, I've been, like I said, I've been listening to podcasts for, at this point, this had to be around 2017. At this point, I've been listening to the podcast for maybe a good 6 or 7 years, if I got my math right. But I've been listening to podcasts for that long, and it just dawned on me as I was listening to it. I was like, I know how to make these. I've never made one before, but essentially, like, being an audio engineer, it's just a different kind of audio. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, music is actually way more complicated in terms of, how to put it together. There's a lot more mixing and mastering that goes into music most of the time. Now, granted, there are some very complicated podcast projects that I work on all the time that are more scripted stuff, and they can be just as complicated as music for sure. Right. But for the most part, I was just like, this shit's real easy. I know how to make these. Maybe there are podcast jobs out there for me. And that's how I got my first podcast gig. I actually went on Craigslist, and shout out to Craigslist, because Craigslist has actually gotten me every job in my entire life.
Really?
Real talk. Real talk. Like, and I was going, so I went on Craigslist, and I was just like, maybe there's a podcast producer job, podcast engineer job, or something like that. And I found this posting about like someone looking for a new podcast engineer. And I wrote to him, and I was just like, oh, and it was like a little late, and I was just like, damn, is this posting still live? Like, are you still accepting applicants for this? He's like, dude, well, I got a lot of postings, but he's just like, I'll take one more, sure. He's just like, what I need you to do to prove yourself is, like, he had like 100 some odd episodes, and the name of the podcast is called The Human Experience. Okay. And like, it was a really pretty established podcast at the time, and I was just like, damn, like, this dude's pretty connected. Why does he have a Craigslist ad looking for a producer? But I wasn't asking no questions. I was just like, okay, cool.
Could be a scam. Yeah. Who is this?
Yeah. So, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna show this guy everything that I can do based on like the things that I know that I can do. So he asked me to essentially like create a best of episode based on like the 100 other episodes that he that he had already put out there. So I was like,
to listen
okay,
to them. Like,
yeah.
Like, oh,
so I didn't listen to all 100. I ain't doing that, but because they were like hours of episodes. I was definitely not doing that. But I picked out 4 episodes that, like, after listening for the first 15 minutes, I was like, okay, these sounds pretty good. And I just created a best of episode showing all different types of, like, I don't know, effects that I could do on voices and stuff like that, but not trying to overdo it or anything like that, but just trying to show you, like, hey, I know how to do some things that probably a lot of these other quote unquote podcast engineers that aren't from the music world are thinking of doing. And he was just like, yo, this is super dope. You're my guy. And I started working for him almost like within 2 weeks after that, and worked on that podcast for about 2 years, and I helped that podcast grow. And I learned a lot from that podcast too, because what's really funny about it too is like a lot of like the most obscure people that you've seen on like Joe Rogan's podcast, for example, are like, or they're not even obscure now, like, but like there's a bunch of people that are on there that are like super experts in things that are super niche. like those people were all on the Human Experience like 5 years prior to him being.
Wow.
So
So
it's kind of
they were
crazy.
the blueprint.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm not trying to say Rogan copied us or anything like that, but I'm just trying to say, you know,
Similar, huh?
yeah, we was doing some numbers. Like I always tell people like on a bad week we got like 16,000 listens. On a good week we had like 100,000 listens. It was a little bit guest dependent, but you know we were doing things. So
Wow. That's interesting you mentioned how you were able to use like a lot of the music stuff you do and incorporate into that, because I tell people all the time that nothing that you do is not useful. Like you can combine skill
oh
sets
yeah,
to go into other things. That's what makes you different from everybody else. If you
hmm,
have something not typically applied to that industry, but you can still incorporate it.
oh yeah, for sure. Like you know, there's projects that I'm working on now that are pretty much very heavily influenced on like the experience that I've worked on in the music. Like, there's a creative agency that's hired me for 2 jobs now. One is I did a project for Nike like 3 or 4 months ago. It was like an internal, like, yeah, like, it's like an internal podcast, and I'm working on another podcast now. I think I can say that I'm working on a podcast for Cash App, but it's not something that they're going to be releasing. I believe it's just something that's going to be internal for their marketing department. But
Uh,
essentially it's like they want to be able to give out their marketing information on trends and stuff to like their marketing department, but they want their people to actually listen to it. So instead of them giving them like 100-page report, well,
Make
I'm
it like,
essentially,
I guess, bearable to listen to and
yeah,
interesting.
making it something fun to listen to. And that music background is really helpful because I'm like, hey, I can make it really flow like a mixtape. So
Oh, wow.
yeah,
Are you booked and busy?
very booked and very busy.
I remember when I first was looking for podcasts. I think your podcast, I just typed in Brooklyn podcast. No, but I literally typed in a Brooklyn podcast in studio. Yours was the first one that popped up. Went to the page and I was like, I didn't even shop around for other places. I was like, oh, I want to record here. Like,
Hmm.
no ifs, ands, or buts. So in your opinion, this is your chance to flex on your studio.
Okay.
What sets your studio apart from the other studios that are just popping up all over the place?
Yeah, because there's a lot more of them now. I definitely know that I have some new quote unquote competition. And to be honest with you, I really mean this with all the humbleness in the world. And excuse the ambulance in the background if y'all can hear it. That's the Bronxing right now. But uh, but what I say this with all the humbleness in the world. Like I know the reason why people come back or like our studio is because I really take the time to try to connect with the people in the studio. And I try to also hire other engineers that want to do the same thing. And when I say connect with you, it's just like we want to see you win. Like
Mm-hmm.
I always wanted to create an atmosphere. Like to be honest with you, like I don't really care about recording podcasts. Like I know that sounds weird, but like that's not like really what my motivation is. Like my motivation is to help people be able to express themselves how they really want to express themselves and create an environment where they feel comfortable
Shows.
expressing themselves.
I remember
So
a couple of a couple of crossover episodes I did because of you, like recommending certain podcasts that recorded at the studio, like the family. Like, oh, you should be a guest on their show, and they should come, like vice versa.
mhm,
And that actually helped because, like, Willow Wednesdays, like
yeah,
they were literally one of the best episodes we've done. Honestly, like it was
yeah,
so fun having them on, even though the episode was like mostly about sex, but it was fine. And then me
yeah,
and
yeah.
Jen came on their episode, and I was getting chewed in the
Mhm.
comments because theirs was live, and people was mad at me about the whole thing I said about my ex-boyfriend not holding the door for the guy, and I was upset.
Their comment section is legendary.
They hated my guts, and I'm just like, I'm actually a likable person. Why do people not like me?
No.
But I say all that to say that it really shows how committed you are to your clients. And I've been guest on other people's podcasts and go to other studios, and
Mhm.
either the setting I'm not comfortable with or the setup is not comfortable, but there's no like person there. So if something was to go wrong,
Yeah,
if the audio goes wrong, who the person is? Like, I just rent out a room and here's the equipment, do your thing. And I'm like, for me, it was so easy because it was like a one-stop shop. For me to like make things and do things that's to be successful for me, if it's a lot of work involved, I'm not gonna want to do it. Like for
hmm,
me, I wanted to have a podcast because people kept telling me to have one.
yeah,
And the idea of, oh, I have to do the audio, I have to do this, I have to do that. But when I recorded with you that first episode, you didn't have to do much editing because you pay. I think you say you pay extra for like you want like specific editing,
yeah.
but you clean people's audios track and that's included in the fee. And I'm
Mhm.
like, I like that. I don't have to do much. I don't need a bunch of sound effects. So it was really
Yeah,
professional for me, and it felt good bringing people to that studio too. My guests, because it was like, oh, this is a real studio. I'm like, yes, this is
yeah.
where we record.
I mean, to be honest with you, like that's all by design because it's like number one, it's like I obviously having worked as a podcast producer, but also sort of like knowing the sort of hangups that the people who haven't been working in audio for like, their entire lives and stuff like that, or haven't been working in video, which is something that I learned along the way. But like, there's a lot of stuff you need to know how to do if you're going to do this thing solo. So for me, like I really wanted to create a process that was going to be, easy, like you said, like a one-stop shop. Like you're going to get pretty much a broadcast-ready product very quickly. By the way, because like we really
That
aimed.
turnaround time is
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah. Most people are always shocked when I'm just like, oh, like it's like they'll leave the studio and the episode hits their inbox within 20 minutes to an hour of them leaving the studio. Like I wanted to create that because I'm just like, like I did like a lot of research too. Like I kind of was reading reviews of other studios at the time. And granted, like there weren't as many podcast studios back in 2018. There was only like maybe 2 or 3 out there. There's a bunch of other studios, but like
A lot of
people were,
studios that just popped up.
yeah, but people were always just like, oh, it takes a long time for me to get my files, or the engineer. One thing I always say, we're not push button engineers. Like we're not just hit record and walk out the room type of engineers or anything like that.
Yeah.
Like we're there listening and making sure that everything is running and working, and we're actually listening to the content. I think that's the other thing
because
too.
when you're done recording, you give feedback. You give valuable feedback. You'll say, hey, this didn't work. Maybe for the next episode, which I always loved because I needed it.
Yeah, and people need that. You know what I'm saying? Like I can't tell you how many times people, I applaud people who actually finally take that first. I say that's not a big step. That's a huge step.
It is.
To finally just be like, I'm going to try this out, see how it goes. And even if they don't, I don't recommend to wing it or anything like that, because you should come prepared. But at the same time, just taking that step is really hard for people. And the truth of the matter is, it always amazes me how many people are just like, after that first episode, be like, oh wow, that was dope. Like that was dope. That was amazing. And I'm just like, nah. I mean, like it's cool that you have fun. Like it's because it's supposed to be fun. Like the recording part is really fun, but like the notion that you are going to step into something that you've never done before and you're going to be super good at it is kind of crazy. Like it really is. It's kind of crazy. And I also tell people this too. I'm just like, podcasting, you just take podcasting out of it for a second. You're creating content. There's all other kinds of content. There's music, there's movies, there's TV shows. If you look at especially like music, all those 3 I just mentioned, like how many writers are on a TV show? How much thought is going into all these things?
It's a whole process before it even makes it to being aired.
Yeah. So like so I think it's a little bit, for lack of better words, like I don't know if it's short-sighted. I don't know, maybe a little arrogant to think like, oh, you could just walk in.
No.
And
Oh,
just
it is. I
and
think it's
just be
that, and
amazing.
also people think because they have an opinion, they have to be on the mic.
Yeah.
And it's like, no. Like I think I actually I'm gonna ask you this next, but I know every time someone asks me like, oh, I want to start a podcast, what should I do? And I'm really big on, and you probably know this, I'm really big on the type of content Black people consume. We have enough ratchet stuff.
Yeah.
So, and then mostly guys ask me, I'll say, if you can give me a fleshed out 10 episode, like I want to see 10 episodes, a draft of 10, an outline of 10 episodes for your podcast. And I want to see what kind of guests you want to bring on. If you can't show me that, I'm not about to give you any energy or give you any type of information or even recommend anything to you, because you just had one conversation and you decided that, oh, I want to have a podcast. But in your expertise, when someone wants to start a podcast, what are the key elements they should consider?
Well, I think first and foremost, and like it's funny because I'm actually working on a podcasting course. I'll talk about that later. But like, yeah, it's finally happening. Yep, finally happening. But yeah, I was thinking I'll drop that nugget now in case anybody's interested. But where was I with that? So like, if somebody's interested in starting a podcast, where should they start? Like, I know this is going to sound really cheesy because I feel like a lot of people who sort of, I don't know, create self-help stuff to be like, it starts with your mentality, but for real though, it starts with having like the right mentality and just understanding like a few key things. Like, and one of the first things I always ask people is I'm just like, actually knowing what your podcast is actually about and why you want to do it. Like if you just like if you don't know why you want to do it and just somebody because people told you, that's not a reason to start a podcast. Like and I know that might sound contrary to somebody who like, you know, makes a living off of podcast clients, but the truth of the matter is, like, if you're not ready to step foot in front of into my studio, you know, with at least an idea of what you want to record or what your podcast is about, I prefer you figure that out first and then come see me later. Because you don't need to pay me to figure that part out.
Yeah.
And the other thing is like the main thing is a lot of people don't know what they actually want to talk about or what their podcast is actually about, and why they want it. Why they want to do it, I think, is also maybe even more important, because, you know, there are people that start a podcast, you know, as something that's in conjunction with their business so their clients can get to know them. Sometimes people just want to do it as a hobby. And to be honest with you, if you just want to do it as a hobby and not take things so seriously, like, there's nothing wrong with that either, to be honest with you.
But you don't need to come to a studio for that. You can just go on
live. Yeah. You can do that. You can do that all on your own.
Piece on Facebook and let it live there.
Yeah. But I think the main thing is that people don't understand this one key thing, and it's like understanding what the goal of a podcast actually is. And this is a little bit of an opinion, but I believe it's very true. I believe the goal of a podcast is to essentially build a community around content that you and your audience are mutually interested in. It's about building a community more so than anything else. I don't care how many people are downloaded or subscribed. If you've built a community around your content, you have a successful podcast. But what you really need to think about when you're first starting your podcast is, A, what is it about? B, why do you want to do it? And C, what is your listeners going to get out of it? Because I think a lot of people think their podcast is about them, and it's actually not about you. It's about your listeners. It's about your viewers. It's about your audience. What are they getting out of it? Because at the end of the day, I'm like, yeah, they're coming in to tune into you, but also at the same time, this is something they're connecting with you on a mutual interest or mutual things that you like. So it's really more about your audience. And I tell people that all the time, to focus more on your audience than focus on yourself.
Right. I remember when I first started my podcast, I didn't know who my audience was. I just knew that I was always arguing with people on Facebook about Black topics. And I'm like, I'm going on my podcast to educate people my generation, because y'all know what y'all talking about. And then what came out of that organically, I started with, I guess when you pay attention to who's actually listening, I noticed that a lot of creatives were listening to my stuff, artists. So that's how, and that's really, actually, this right here, Back Talk with JiJi, is an extension of that, because a lot of my content on my page is catered to artists, catered to creatives and professionals, and helping people. Like, I know I have connections to people, and it's like, I want to bring a platform where you can get the information you need. You don't have to pay to go to these brunches. You don't have to pay all this money for this, all this other stuff that you don't need, when there's people who right here who will give you the gems for free. So that's how I kind of figured out, oh, that could be my role for this. So it's really been essential for me to know my audience, because now it's so much easier to figure out what type of guests to have, or what type of, I guess, promotions I want to do. If I want to sell merch eventually, I know what kind of stuff I want to give to people. And I think a lot of people don't know who their audience is. They're most so stuck on the topic that they want to talk about.
Yeah, and people don't think about that enough, you know, in terms of like, you have to think about who is your audience. And it's not that you have to like pigeonhole people, but you have to kind of know, like, if you want to create a community, you kind of have to know where those people are at, both online and offline, and be in those places and be in those spaces, you know. So yeah, but when you're starting your podcast, it really just comes down to knowing what your podcast is. First and foremost, knowing what your podcast is about. And then the other thing that I also tell people as a useful tip in order to help figure that out is actually going through the motions of writing a pitch for your podcast. And what I mean for that is, like, literally like an elevator pitch. Like, if someone were to approach you on the street and be like, hey, and you were to tell them, hey, I have a podcast, and and they'd be like, okay, what is it about? You literally have 2 to 3 sentences to be able to get that thing out, and it needs to feel like what I call verbal clickbait. Like, it needs to be something if you have a good and effective pitch for your podcast, it kind of forces you to sort of focus on whatever your perspective is and whatever it is you want to talk about and where those two things meet. And that pitch can be such a powerful, like if you're able to come up with a really good pitch for your podcast, it can be such a very, very powerful tool for people.
I'm trying to think of what mine would be for this.
Yeah.
In-depth conversations with industry experts, helping people reach goals in their perspective.
It's a little long. See, I tell people it's harder. It's harder than people think, but I tell people that it's worth it. Like I see, what's it called? I see Raphael from White Label American, one of my longest clients, has a super dope podcast right now. He's joined the chat, or he's joined the live, and I can't remember the exact description of his podcast, but his podcast is New Immigrant Stories Told by a New Immigrant. Like that's essentially like what the pitch of his podcast is. And it's something different, like, you know what I'm saying? Like it grabs your attention immediately, but it's also very clear. And the things I tell people, you know, you have a good pitch is when it's very clear and it's compelling. And it's compelling to the audience that you're trying to reach. If it's clear and compelling, then you probably have a pretty good pitch. But that pitch does so much for you. Like, not only does it help you get focused on what your podcast is actually about, but what it also can do is be the literal description of your podcast, you know, for on all the platforms. So like if someone new comes across your podcast, hey, there's the marketing pitch right there for people to see. Boom, you've got that knocked out of the way. And then I also tell people too, like I just said, like think of it as an elevator pitch, but when you're talking to people in real life, you know this better than I do. You can't be shy about letting people know that you have a podcast. So if you have a good pitch, it's an effective marketing tool to get people into whatever it is that you're talking about on your podcast. And then to even take it to another step is if you have a good pitch, then people who are already tuned into your podcast, who want to share it with others, they have something quick and easy that they can also then tell people as be like, hey, you should check out this show, and then they'll recite your pitch. Like a pitch is one of those things. It's like there's so many things that you can win when you have an effective pitch. You know what I'm saying?
I need to work on that. My pitch is me. Like when I meet people and they're like, "Oh, you're so great. What do you do?" I'll always plug anything. Like I have a series on Instagram called Bad Talk with JiJi, where I interview, you know, experts in certain fields, and then I just drop gems for people. They'll let me see Instagram. Like, but I feel like I have to be more clear because eventually I do want this to get bigger. But
yeah, and to be honest with you, it doesn't have to be perfect from the beginning or anything like that. And Raphael actually said, he's like using stories from mostly new immigrants to take down artificial walls. Like it's a good, you know what I'm saying? Like
he's good with words. Can you write my pitch?
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I've written a few pitches for people. Like, you know, I'm like, based on, because I just listen to people and based on what I see their podcast as being, sometimes people don't exactly 100% know, and I'll help them synthesize that for them. So,
do you think there's a process people can do where they can figure out the topic or even a niche for their podcast?
I think there's a process to figure out the niche for their podcast. Well, I think some people naturally have, depending on what they want to talk about, like some people naturally have topics that are niche. But if you're talking about a podcast that is largely what I call a perspective podcast, and what I mean by that,
those relationship ones, about to talk about 50-50.
Yeah, you can say you could throw relationships in there. You could throw sports podcasts in there. You could throw current event podcasts in there. They're all perspective podcasts. That's the way I view them. And what you have to do with those, because I largely tell people with those kinds of podcasts that it's hard to be in those fields because they are very crowded and it's really hard to differentiate yourself. But what I tell people is the people who succeed the best are the ones where it's very obvious to the listeners and the viewers and the audience members that it's very obvious what their perspective is. And to go back to the pitch here for a second too, like some people are like, oh, I have a podcast that's about everything, right? You know, I would say the way you can make your pitch be better or to be able to help niche down to what your podcast is actually about is like, okay, your podcast isn't about everything, number one, because a podcast about everything is a podcast about nothing. Let's get that out. Let's get that out of the way. But let's say I had like a love and relationships podcast that I'm talking about, right? And how you can niche down is sort of think about what are the things that are unique to you, and you start adding those to part of your pitch, right? So for me, like if I was talking about for me, like well, the only thing people don't know is like, yeah, I grew up in a very white suburb. So I'm like, okay, black perspective from white suburbia. Boom. That's something that's unique, relatively unique to me.
Mm.
Boom. Also worked in the music industry. But it's like you start trying to find what are the things that really kind of quote unquote define you a little bit.
I was about to say, it sounds like it's really based on you as the person.
Based on you as a person, but the cool part about it is that those unique details are interesting to people. And those unique details will draw people in, but they don't necessarily pigeonhole you into talking about one particular subject. Those are just the things where you draw you in so you get a chance to know this person's perspective. You'd be like, oh, that's a unique perspective. Maybe it's worth checking that person out for that. But it doesn't pigeonhole me or anybody else into one topic. So it's more or less you try to figure out what are the things that are either going on in your life, have gone on in your life that things that you have, that you have a unique perspective on, and throwing those into your pitch, and ultimately those can be the things that also help narrow your focus in terms of what your podcast is about too.
Okay, so we're going to fast forward. Say you have your podcast, you've been doing it 2-3 months or whatever. Mm-hmm. How can someone measure the success of their podcast? How do they know if they're on the right track?
Well, one of the things I tell people is the first 2 or 3 months, I would say you need to have a little bit more patience, because the first 2 to 3 months you're really just starting out. However, I always tell people you really do need to have a plan, and to have a plan with you have to start out with some goals, in terms of like, okay, I want to have 10 listeners within 2 to 3 months that are regularly with me all the time, right? That's not a very large goal or anything like that, but you need to just start off with some numbers that you're like, okay, what are some achievable numbers that you believe that you can hit? Mm-hmm. But the way you know that your podcast is growing, or at least being successful, in terms of growth, is if you're seeing like an uptick in engagement. That's probably the number one thing I would say. If you're seeing people really reacting and getting in touch with you about your content, you're starting to build that community. And I said before online, but also in real life and in person too.
Right.
But I really am a big proponent of being like, you can almost treat it sort of like a numbers game a little bit. Like, for example, you have to, I told you before, you have to be vocal about, letting people know that you have a podcast. And I always tell people, I'm just pick out a number I'm gonna tell 5 new people a week that I have a podcast in real life, while also doing social media posts. Pick a number, how many social media posts, and when and how often you do them, and be consistent about doing that. And you can do it, and it really comes down to the consistency part. One of the 2 keys to really running a successful podcast is consistency and engagement. For most people, it's gonna be really slow those first couple months. That's not to say that you can't have a really good start. I've seen people start off really, really hot, and get to places that most people would take years to do whatever they were able to do in a few months. But that's also part of it is just due to planning. Like, sometimes they already had a plan in place already. They already had marketing channels. They already had a whole bunch of things. They had something else going on, mm-hmm. That they were doing beforehand, or maybe they had an audience of some size beforehand, and then were able to grow it really, really quickly. There's all sorts of reasons why people's podcasts blow up really, really quickly. But for the most part, most of us, it's going to be slow in the beginning, but it's really all about remaining consistent. And for multiple different reasons too. Also, if you're not consistent, at least in terms of putting out content too, and you're putting the content out every I'm sorry, I'm not trying to put you on blast, but it's just if you're putting it's hard. Being consistent is hard, but the truth of the matter is, it's if you know that you want to put your podcast out every Monday at 6 a.m., you need to put your podcast out every Monday at 6 a.m., And here's the other thing, too. If your lifestyle doesn't support you being able to make content at that clip, then don't do that much, mm-hmm. if you have to make your podcast, bi-weekly, monthly, obviously the more more content you can put out more quickly, the quicker it's going to grow. So I'm not going to try to say that like the less content you put out, you'll be fine. But at the same time, I'm like, if you're at least consistent about it and your audience knows when to expect content from you, then that is a really, really key and crucial thing, because you can't be putting content out, telling people it's coming out every Monday, and then 2 weeks from now, you're just going to be like, oh, wait, guys, I missed a week or whatever. It'll be coming out on Thursday, and then it drops on a Wednesday, and then on a Saturday. Like, it's not going to work. It's not going to work.
Like Thursday, I tried to go live. I know we had to reschedule because of me. I had an event I went to. So I was like, dang, I hope that doesn't affect anything.
No lie, you did me a favor. I just got back from a vacation, and I was super jet lagged. So, like, I was like, this was actually a good thing for me. So I'm not mad at you.
Like, I was like, I would commit to every Thursday. And then for me, the reason why I wanted this show to be heavily based on guests and their expertise is because I also know me. If I'm going live every Thursday with just me, I'm going to make every excuse on why I don't feel like going live. But if I know I have scheduled people, I don't like wasting people's time. I'm really big on that. Like, I'll be punctual for other people. I'll make sure, like, that makes me have to do it. Like, even today, I'm like, I got to go live with Josh today. I'm like, nope, I can't. I have to do this. Yeah. So for a podcast that's struggling, how should they go about promoting their podcast to grow it, to grow their audience?
Well, here's the number one thing. I'm actually gonna flip the conversation a little bit. Not onto you, but like I'm actually gonna tell you what I really think when someone says like my podcast isn't working or my podcast is not going. I'm trying to be how kind I should be.
No, you don't gotta be kind. Be blunt. We love that.
95% of the reason why your podcast isn't growing is largely because you have a content problem. It's not a marketing problem. It's not a marketing problem. You might have a marketing problem on top of the content problem. Don't get me wrong. But I'd probably say 95% of the time, it's probably a content problem. It's the big elephant in the room that nobody wants to admit to themselves. But the truth of the matter is,
your content is trash, or you're choosing something that's oversaturated, and you have to compete with. Yeah, because
here's the truth of the matter is, like, I tell this to people all the time, like, even if your content is great in the beginning, it's still going to be a little bit slow. But I tell people to focus on making really, really good content, because at the end of the day, if you're making really, really good content and you at least you've at least attracted or gotten it in front of the people who would ideally like to consume that content, they're going to be the marketers for you. And the reason why I like to emphasize having really, really good content is because, like, I think of it this way. And the reason why, like I said, what I just said is because, like, everybody thinks their marketing plan is just, everybody's marketing plan right now is just to have a social media plan. Like, and to be honest with you, their social media plan isn't great to begin with anyway, but everyone thinks the way to market is solely just social media. And I always ask people this question: when was the last time you checked out a pod because of a social media post? A brand new pod that you started following or listening to or watching to because of a social media post. Now, you might be a very open person. I'm not trying to say it's never happened before, but by and large, the reason why you started, whatever your favorite podcast is, whether you watch it or whether you listen to it, it's the reason why you started consuming that podcast is because someone told you that you need to check that out. So that's why I try to tell people, if your content is good and geared towards the audience that you're trying to attract, then it becomes the best marketing tool, better than anything else. Now, like, and what I'm talking about right now is like word of mouth marketing, and everyone's like, oh man, but that's a lot of work. You're right.
No, it's actually not.
It is a lot. I think it is a lot of work, but I think it is way more powerful in terms of a social media post. And now, that's not to say that social media isn't important. It definitely is. But I always tell people social media is better. I always tell people that social media is more of a marketing tool to inform the people that already know you that you have new content out, or they should go check out some old content, or et cetera, or you got something else that you want to update them on. But like, that's what I think social media is good for that first. And then attracting new people to your content second, but I see it as like a distant second.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I'm not trying to say it's not important, but for example, we have a relatively new podcaster that's been come to the studio for like the last maybe 6 months or so. They're called the Meta Kings podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think they have somewhere around 10,000 subscribers on YouTube. They've only been doing this for 22 episodes, right? And for most people, that's a really good number to have for only 22 episodes. And they're releasing like kind of bi-weekly. And so I asked them, I was just like, how are you guys doing? How'd you guys grow so quickly? And they told me after every single show that they do, that they record, they go out into the streets and just talk to people. Like literally just find a social gathering that they personally want to go to that's sort of related to the content that they want to talk about. So they go where their a potential audience is, and they just meet people and tell them, hey, I got this podcast. And they grew their numbers that way. And I'm not trying to say that everybody, I'm not trying to say that everybody necessarily has the time to do, because they'll go out for like these guys. They probably go out for like a couple hours and something like that.
If it's something you want to do, make the time.
Yeah, you make the time. Yeah.
You don't have to go out right after you record, but that weekend, try to go to an event that's related to it and talk about your podcast.
Yeah, but like I just tell people, you need to not be shy. And the thing is, like, even if you're not going out in real life, there are plenty of communities online. People go to Facebook groups or whatever. People go to meetup groups or whatever, and virtual events. You find a way to figure out where the community of people that you would kind of like to attract to your content is, and then you have real life engagement with them there. You don't have to be shameless, quote unquote, shameless with your promotion and stuff like that. But if you have real interactions with people and try to like have real conversations with people, you can get listeners a lot easier that way. And granted, it does take a lot of effort. It takes a lot of manual effort, but I'm
gotta do it. Everybody thinks podcasting is easy. They just think you just get on the mic and just start talking. They don't really think about the work that goes into it. And I hate that because I don't think anything that we're trying to do, especially as an entrepreneur, as a creative, is supposed to be easy. I mean, I guess it becomes easy when you enjoy it and you have a process. But I hate the idea that people just think that, I have an opinion, I'm gonna just go on the mic and talk.
Yeah.
And mostly people want to make money from the podcast.
Yeah.
So that's actually my next question too. How should people go about monetizing, and when should they think about monetizing their podcast? So
here's a controversial opinion. I think you should think about monetizing from the start.
Oh,
I
really?
don't. Yeah. And I don't know if it's that controversial, because I think there are plenty of other people that feel the same way.
Why would it be controversial? Like, people don't think.
Most people feel like they need to get to some magic number before they can start monetizing their podcast and stuff like that. And whatever magic made up number you have in your head, that's just something that you made up. Like nobody told you. They probably feel like you have to have a certain amount of, I guess, dedicated listeners before you can start making money, which is not really true. Let me tell you something that I've come to realize, especially working with a lot of podcasts that are more scripted based. There are plenty of, and granted, like, these are different style podcasts. They're not conversational. Sometimes they're journalistic. Sometimes they're scripted comedy or something like that. But there are a lot of people out here, a lot of people that don't look like you and me, that don't even think about releasing their podcast until they get funding first. Ain't that an idea? But to be honest with you, that's true for a lot of things, whether it's in film or TV or anything. They'll be like, hey, we got a proof of concept here. We're going to go and try and get funding for it first. And to be honest with you, even if you're not doing something scripted, there's no reason why you can't do that too. And I've known other podcasters, including myself, by the way, who have been able to get funding for podcasts that aren't even out yet. So. Wait,
speak more about that. So do you record the episodes and just don't release them? And you use those episodes to kind of pitch to people?
Yeah, so for example, I'll tell you an example of a client, and I'll tell you an example of I'll tell you an example right now. I'll tell you the example right now. So I'm working, Brooklyn Podcasting Studio will be actually releasing its first joint podcast in conjunction with, what's the name of her media company? I'm going to be so, I can't believe I'm blanking on the name of the media company.
The studio's having their own podcast. That's cute.
Yeah, we're having our own podcast, but it's in conjunction. It's really with Untapped Heights. That's the name. That's the name of it. I don't think they have a page yet. The person who owns it is a producer over at Sirius XM. She's a producer for what's it called? Not for like a super big show, but she's a producer at Sirius XM, and she also might be getting so she's also a producer, and she's also an on-air talent too over there. And long story short, we are what's it called? We're working on a podcast about the re-examination of the video vixens, like the models from hip hop videos from like the late 90s, early 2000s. And we're sort of re-examining their larger impact on society and what their actual impact is, because without giving too much of it away, like we were able to find through, and we got a chance to talk to some of the most prominent video vixens from that.
Karen Steffens?
Yeah, we talked to Corinne Steffens. We did talk to Corinne Steffens.
I'm not gonna lie, she's one of my favorite ones.
Yeah, we talked to Corinne Steffens. We talked to some of the casting agents. We talked to some of the music video producers and stuff like that.
Is this like a journalistic podcast? Okay.
Yeah, it's like a journalistic podcast. But we're hoping to release this thing. I'm not sure when exactly we're going to release this thing, but we're hoping to release this thing hopefully the springtime. We've got a lot of it done, but like we're trying to right now, we're shopping it around to a couple of different networks. But we also got one or two small sponsors already, and it's really just leveraging what you have in order to be attractive to a sponsor. Now, to be like, hey, I don't have any numbers to show them, right? I can't show them any numbers because the podcast isn't out yet. But hey, what can I leverage? I'm like, I can leverage the name of Brooklyn Podcasting Studio, which is not famous, but I would say we're a little infamous out here. A little bit infamous out here.
No.
Yeah, we're pretty.
Someone came in my DMs talking about the studio as if it's new to me, and I'm like, actually, the owner Josh, I had a show on there. Like, he thought he was spitting gems to me, and I'm like, boy, you late. I've been recording.
Oh, and shout out to, I'm going to say this right now, shout out to Black Podcasters Association, who just joined the chat, just joined the live video. If anybody's looking for, because like I know a lot about podcasting, but I'm never going to be the person to tell you that I know everything about podcasting. Black Podcasters Association is a really, really dope organization with a really, really great community of dedicated podcasters that pretty much talk about all things related to podcasting to help big themselves up. So if anybody's looking for some extra, a community to join, people that look like us, that are also dedicated podcasters, definitely go check out Black Podcasters Association.
I'm about to follow them.
Yeah, there's a couple other ones I was going to mention too later on, but I'll mention them now. Podcasters Live, Steve Worthy, I believe, is the guy who runs that. You guys should check him out if you guys are looking to do like step up your live production and stuff like that. He's really dope. And also Afros and Audios. That's another one that's also pretty popular. Yeah, which a lot of people, I didn't know if you were following them or not, but like they are definitely worth the follow. They do a couple of different events. They have guest speakers and stuff.
Definitely will. I love events.
Yeah. You should check them out. Yeah. And yeah, like so those
three. Something.
Yeah, those three I would definitely recommend. Yeah. You would be a great host. I'm not gonna lie. You would be a really, really great host. I'm sorry, I went on a whole tangent just because I saw my name in the chat. What was your question again? I'm so sorry.
I was about monetizing your podcast, and you were saying that most you guys, you using your example of what you guys are working on. You said that you get funding before you actually like start the podcast.
Yeah. So like So I always tell people to take a multi-pronged approach, right? So you can get monetization through crowdfunding, which is like getting people that are already in your audience to support you. There are many different, platforms for crowdfunding, most notably Patreon. There are other ones like Buy Me a Coffee. There's another one called, I think it's either Coffee or Ko-fi. There's another one called Padia, which I've looked into a little bit, and I kind of think that is maybe an alternate that I kind of like a little bit better than Patreon, but really no knock to Patreon. You can also crowdfund by just simply having your own independent website too, and then have people subscribe to your website. I always tell people, like, I don't understand why more people don't take that option because you don't have to pay a middleman in between. But, if you're good enough with designing a website, which you don't need to be that savvy, you could also do that too. But there's crowdfunding. What's it called? If you built up a little bit of an audience already, and you're doing a really job, or if you feel like, I have a pretty decent sized audience that's really tapped in and tuned into me, there are lots of podcasting networks out here, both large and small, that are always looking for new talent and stuff like that. And
There's one in Brooklyn too, Pineapple Studios.
Yeah, actually, I met one of the Actually, I didn't get a chance to meet him, but I was on a panel at an Audio Engineers Society sort of convention that happens in New York every year. And I was speaking on a panel, and he was actually supposed to be there, and I really wanted to meet him. But yeah, they do super dope stuff out of Pineapple Studio.
Mm-hmm. For real. I applied for a job there. I never heard nothing back.
Yeah. I don't think there's a very large outfit there, so it's like
I think I don't know if it was an assistant role or it was just like a coordinator role, but like they had something I wanted to work with the idea of, I'm gonna work here to learn so I could plug my podcast and respond to my email. But it's
not a bad idea. You gotta shoot your shot.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I was like, let me see. I don't have no experience, but hey, I'm here.
Yeah. You always gotta shoot your shot. And then the third thing is obviously finding sponsors. And what's it called? In terms of finding sponsors, the thing I always try to tell people is you should think about, at least for me, and I'm going to tell you a story about this too, is I'm more interested in trying to find the sponsor that I can have a long-term relationship with and that has a product or service that is really going to connect with my audience. That's what I would like to do if I'm running a podcast. And the reason why, and not so much about the necessarily dollars about it, because I'm going to tell you the story real briefly. When I was working, for the Human Experience as a producer, we had I told you we were doing numbers anywhere between 16,000 to 100K weekly, depending on the guest. And I was just like, dude, why are we not monetizing? Why don't we have any sponsors or anything like that? And long story short, there's a bunch of smaller sponsors that we could have gotten that he felt that we're worth more than what they're willing to pay. And to be honest with you, I'm not going to say that he's necessarily wrong about that, but those sponsors were way more aligned with what our audience's needs, wants, and likes would be than the ultimate sponsor we ended up getting, which was, I believe it was Casper Mattresses, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So Casper is actually pretty huge. They're up there with Sleep Number beds and stuff like that. They're actually pretty good. They're pretty they're known as being one of those sponsors you hear in a lot of big podcasts and stuff like that. So they spend a lot of ad dollars in the podcasting space. But for the amount of work and effort that it took to get and we got I don't remember how much it was. I want to say it was around either $7,000 or $8,000 for that. Now, granted, that's nothing to sneeze at because we had $0 before that. We had no money. We had no money. But it took us forever to get that money, and it took us forever, and they paid it out in pieces. And it wasn't really directly them. They had an ad sales sort of agency that sort of handles their marketing dollars, and they were the ones that we were really dealing with. We weren't really dealing directly with Casper. But I say that to say we got a quote unquote big sponsor, but it took us a really long time to get paid. And it really, sure, did people who were tuning into that podcast care about sleep? Sure. But we probably could have gotten 4 or 5 other sponsors that were willing to pay us anywhere between $300 to $600 a month, and probably would have been willing to pay that consistently for a year. And it took us over a year to get paid for that one sponsorship. And it took a lot of follow up, and it took a lot of it took me personally, because I was the one that went out and got it. It took me personally a lot of time and effort and investment. And when I think about it, I'm when I look at the time investment, I'm I lost money. We lost money,
Yeah.
It was. So for me, and that's not to say that getting a big sponsor is a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with getting there's nothing wrong with getting a big sponsor at all. And if you can get one, and good, and if you can do it with as least amount of friction, and you can get paid, quickly and stuff like that, or at least on time,
Right.
at least on time. then it's worth then like it's definitely worth doing. But what I really am trying to get at though is like if you know your audience very well, what they like, what they don't like, what kind of products and services they like, think about that for a second and then go find those products and services, and then you make your pitch to them about then you make your pitch to those sponsors being like, hey, our audience would be perfect for you for X, Y, and Z reason. This is also one of the reasons why it's really good to know some of the statistics. The statistics for that you can get from hosting about